Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a truly fascinating and, honestly, kinda terrifying phenomenon. Have you ever wondered how an entire society's collective mind can actually just fracture? We constantly worry about physical viruses, but today, we're tracking a psychological one. We're going to examine the exact mechanics that cause a whole population to lose its grip on reality and, more importantly, how we can break the chains of that collective madness. So let's dive right in.
Just listen to this warning from the renowned psychiatrist Carl Jung. The greatest threat to civilization is not nature or disease, but our inability to deal with our own psyche. Wow, that's an incredibly powerful hook, right? Because it completely flips our usual survival instincts upside down. We build physical walls, we develop new medicines, we prep for natural disasters, but Jung is telling us that our ultimate vulnerability, the real threat to civilization, actually sits right inside our own minds. If our collective psyche breaks, well, everything else crumbles right along with it.
So, to track this psychological outbreak, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll diagnose the epidemic of madness. Second, we'll examine the mechanics of menticide. Third, we'll look at isolation and totalitarian control. And finally, we'll explore exactly how to cure the collective madness.
All right, starting with Section 1, the epidemic of madness. What does it actually look like when society loses its grip on reality?
Well, the clinical term for this is mass psychosis. It is literally an epidemic of madness, where a massive chunk of society just loses touch with reality and descends into total delusion. We aren't just talking about a few people having a bad day here, or, your normal everyday political disagreements. No way. We're talking about a fundamental society-wide detachment from objective facts. It's the active, contagious spread of collective delusion across a whole population. Think of it exactly like a physical contagion sweeping through a city, but for the mind.
Just think about the contrast for a second. A grounded society remains rational, right? They process information logically and they stay firmly connected to objective reality. They have this shared bedrock of facts that basically allows their world to function. But a society in psychosis? They become completely detached. That shared bedrock just dissolves. The population descends into a collective delusion, and suddenly, that sheer loss of objective reality becomes incredibly dangerous.
Moving on to Section 2, the mechanics of menticide. How exactly does a collective mind get broken in the first place?
This brings us to a pretty chilling concept, menticide. That translates directly to the killing of the mind. And this isn't an accident. It is the systematic, intentional assassination of independent thought through psychological manipulation. Look at it this way. Just as homicide is the killing of the physical body, menticide is the highly targeted destruction of our psychological autonomy.
And there's actually a specific step-by-step formula used to pull us off. Step 1, sow staggered waves of terror. But here's the catch. People eventually adapt to terror, right? So step 2, introduce brief periods of calm. This staggering of intense fear with momentary relief creates this devastating psychological whiplash. The result, which is step 3, is that the population gets locked into a constant state of disturbed panic. They literally never know when the next wave of terror is coming. That complete exhaustion of their cognitive defenses leaves their minds wide open and ready to be molded. Which brings us to Section 3, isolation and totalitarian control. This is the breeding ground for the virus. Imagine a dark, swirling storm of confusion completely covering a city. But the people inside, they aren't weathering the storm together. Instead, they're sitting completely isolated in individual boxes, totally disconnected from one another, just constantly fed chaotic, fear-inducing messages through these glowing screens. This kind of isolation isn't just a byproduct, it's an absolute prerequisite for the virus of madness to actually take hold.
Totalitarians purposefully engineer this exact environment. Their primary goal is to disrupt normal social interactions and enforce individual isolation. Why? Well, because human connection and conversation, those are our natural reality checks. When you sever human connection, you literally leave the masses completely defenseless. They don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of, and that creates an extreme susceptibility to conditioning. Once people are isolated and trapped in that state of disturbed panic we talked about, totalitarians can seamlessly push out illogical propaganda. And the isolated mind, desperate for any solution to the terror, it'll just accept it as reality.
All right, Section 4, curing the collective madness. Let's find the antidote. The absolutely critical first step to recovery is active emancipation from the group's psyche. But how do you actually do that in practice?
Well, you have to realize that your mind isn't just some passive receiver of terror, it's a creative powerhouse. Human imagination and faith are quite literally the fundamental tools we use to construct our reality. The ultimate creative power doesn't reside in some external authority, it lives right within your own human mind, acting almost like a divine body of creation. By reclaiming your imagination, you take the power right back from those trying to break you.
Once you've reclaimed your mind, it's time to take action. First, spread truthful counter-information that acts as a direct antiviral to the propaganda. Next, build independent parallel structures, communities and networks completely outside the totalitarian system. But here is the really profound secret to making that work. To build these structures, you first have to hold a vivid mental vision of a free society, combined with the absolute conviction that it has already been achieved. Maintaining that feeling of the wish fulfilled actually causes external circumstances to shift. Your internal faith literally overrides those external limitations. And finally, use humor. Ridicule the tyrants. When you laugh at them, you completely break their spell of fear and expose the sheer absurdity of their control. It's a real game changer.
So that brings us to our final mandate. In a world suffering from madness, you have to be a beacon of sanity. How will you protect your own psychological autonomy? Always remember that every objective fact in our society was first just a subjective thought. Totalitarians know this, and that is exactly why they want your mind. So the question is, will you let them build a reality of fear? Or will you lovingly exercise your own imagination and faith to construct a reality of freedom? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Your mind is a divine tool. Guard it and use it.